Oh my God!
On November 14th, 2019, I stood in the rain watching them lower my mother into the ground. And I remember thinking that this was the worst day of my life. I was wrong. The worst day came 3 weeks later when I walked into my bedroom and found my wife in bed with the man I considered my brother. They didn't even hear me come in. They were too busy laughing about how pathetic I'd become, how I'd let myself go, how I was drowning in grief while they were falling in love. I didn't say a word. I just closed the door, walked out of that house, and kept walking until I couldn't feel my legs anymore. That night, sleeping in a $29 motel room with stained carpet and a broken heater, I got a voicemail from a lawyer in Manhattan telling me that my mother had left me something in her will. I almost deleted it. I figured it was her old Honda and maybe a few $100s in a savings account she never touched. But 2 weeks later, sitting across from a woman in a $3,000 suit in an office overlooking Central Park, I learned that my mother hadn't been a waitress her whole life. She'd been an heiress. And the brother she never spoke about, the uncle I never knew existed, had just died and left me $400 million. My wife had already filed for divorce. My best friend had already moved into my house. And neither of them had any idea that the man they'd thrown away like garbage was about to become one of the wealthiest men in Connecticut. This is my story, and I need you to hear every word of it. Because what happened next wasn't just revenge, it was justice. It was poetry. And it was the kind of ending that nobody, not even me, saw coming. My name is Michael, and before everything fell apart, I had what most people would call a good life. Not great, not extraordinary, but good, solid. I was 42 years old, working as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company based out of Hartford, Connecticut. The job paid well enough, around $85,000 a year, and it came with benefits, a decent retirement plan, and just enough respect that I didn't dread Monday mornings. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't struggling either. I had a 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood with oak trees lining the streets and neighbors who waved when you mowed the lawn. I had a wife I'd known since college, a golden retriever named Biscuit, and a best friend I'd had since I was 15 years old. On paper, I was living the American dream. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that paper doesn't tell you the whole story. Jennifer and I met at the University of Connecticut in the fall of 1997. I was a sophomore studying business, and she was a freshman with a double major in communications and marketing. We met at a party, one of those cramped off-campus apartments where the floors were sticky and the music was too loud, and everyone was trying way too hard to look like they weren't trying at all. She was wearing a Red Sox cap and drinking cheap beer out of a plastic cup. And when I made some dumb joke about the Yankees, she laughed so hard she nearly spit her drink out. We started dating 2 weeks later, and by the time I graduated, we were talking about getting married. Her parents loved me. My mother adored her. When everyone said we were perfect for each other, and for a long time I believed them. We got married in June of 2001, just a few months before the world changed forever. The wedding was small, maybe 60 people, held at a country club that Jennifer's father had a membership to. My mother wore the same dress she'd worn to my high school graduation because she couldn't afford a new one. But she smiled the entire day like it was the happiest moment of her life. Derek was my best man. He gave a speech that made everyone cry and then made everyone laugh. And at the end of the night, he pulled me aside and told me that I was the luckiest guy he knew. I believed him then too. Derek and I had been best friends since sophomore year of high school. We met in gym class, bonded over our mutual hatred of running laps, and became inseparable after that. We played on the same basketball team, worked at the same grocery store during summers, and applied to the same colleges, even though we both knew we weren't going to get into anything impressive. He was the kind of friend who showed up when you needed him. No questions asked. When my dad died the summer before my senior year, Derek spent almost every night at my house just sitting with me in silence because he knew I didn't want to talk about it. When I couldn't afford books my first semester of college, he lent me $300 he'd saved from his part-time job and told me to pay him back whenever. He was at my wedding. I was at his sister's funeral. We were brothers in every way that mattered except blood. After Jennifer and I got married, the three of us stayed close. Derek never settled down, never found anyone he wanted to marry, so he became a permanent fixture in our lives. He'd come over for Sunday dinners, watch football games in our living room, help me fix things around the house when I didn't know what I was doing. Jennifer loved him too. She'd bake his favorite cookies, laugh at his dumb jokes, and text him pictures of Biscuit doing something ridiculous. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I missed. The way she'd light up when he walked into a room. The way he'd lingers a little too long when he hugged her goodbye. The inside jokes that I was never quite part of. But at the time, I didn't see any of it. I trusted them both completely. And that trust, that blind, stupid, naive trust, is what destroyed me. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, I need to tell you about my mother, because none of this makes sense without understanding who she was and what she sacrificed to get me where I was. Her name was Catherine Marie Patterson, though she was born Catherine Eleanor Ashford, and that name, that surname, meant something once. But by the time I was old enough to ask questions, she'd buried it so deep that I didn't even know it existed. My mother raised me alone. My father, David Patterson, died when I was 7 years old. He was a construction worker, a good man with rough hands and a kind smile, and he died on a job site when a scaffolding collapse sent him falling 3 stories onto concrete. I don't remember much about him except the way he smelled like sawdust and the way he used to let me sit on his shoulders when we walked to the park. After he died, my mother became everything. She worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. During the day, she waitressed at a diner off Route 9, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like dishwater. At night, she cleaned rooms at a Holiday Inn near the highway. I remember waking up in the middle of the night sometimes and hearing her come home, the sound of her keys on the kitchen counter, the way she'd tiptoe into my room to kiss my forehead, even though she thought I was asleep. She never complained. Not once. She never told me we were struggling, even though I know now that we were. She never made me feel like I was a burden. Not even though raising a kid alone on 2 minimum wage jobs must have been impossibly hard. She put me through college. She helped me buy my first car. She showed up to every single milestone in my life with a smile on her face and pride in her eyes. And she did it all without ever telling me the truth about where she came from. I didn't know she'd grown up in a mansion. I didn't know her family had owned one of the largest industrial manufacturing companies in New England. I didn't know she'd been disowned at 22 for falling in love with a man her father thought was beneath her. She let me believe she'd always been a waitress, always been working class, always been ordinary, and she did it because she wanted me to grow up understanding the value of hard work, humility, and love that wasn't tied to money. She wanted me to be a good man, and I like to think I was. At least, I was trying to be. In March of 2019, my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctor told us she had 6 months, maybe less. There was no treatment that would cure it, only things that might buy her a little more time. She refused most of them. She said she didn't want to spend her last days sick and weak in a hospital bed, pumped full of chemicals that would only make her feel worse. She wanted to be home. She wanted to be comfortable. And she wanted me there with her. So I took a leave of absence from work. I moved back into her apartment, the same small 2-bedroom place she'd lived in since I was a kid, and I stayed with her. I cooked her meals. I read to her when she couldn't sleep, and I held her hand when the pain got too bad and the medication wasn't enough. And Jennifer hated every second of it. At first, she tried to be supportive. She'd come by after work, bring groceries, sit with my mother for a little while before heading home. But as the weeks turned into months, her visits became shorter and less frequent. She started complaining that I was never home, that I was neglecting our marriage, that I was putting my mother before her. I tried to explain that my mother was dying, that I only had a limited amount of time left with her, but Jennifer didn't want to hear it. She'd roll her eyes, cross her arms, and say things like, "You're spending more time with her than you ever spent with me," or "I didn't sign up to be a widow while you play nurse." I didn't argue with her. I didn't have the energy. And I just focused on my mother and tried to ignore the growing distance between us. Derek, on the other hand, was amazing. He checked in on me almost every day. He'd bring me coffee, help me run errands, sit with my mother so I could take a shower or get some sleep. He told me he understood what I was going through, that he'd do the same thing if it were his mom, and that I shouldn't feel guilty for being there for her. He even offered to talk to Jennifer to try to help her understand why I needed to do this. I thanked him. I told him he was the best friend I could ever ask for, and I meant it. I had no idea that while I was watching my mother die, he was falling into bed with my wife. My mother passed away on November 14th, 2019, at 3:27 in the morning. I was holding her hand. She opened her eyes one last time, looked at me and whispered, "You're going to be okay, sweetheart. You're stronger than you think." And then she was gone. I sat there for almost an hour just holding her hand, crying in a way I hadn't cried since I was a child. When the nurse finally came in and gently told me it was time to let go, I felt like I was letting go of the only person in the world who had ever truly, unconditionally loved me. The funeral was small, 43 people, mostly her co-workers from the diner and the hotel, a few neighbors, some people from the church she occasionally attended. Jennifer came, but she spent most of the service on her phone. Derek stayed the entire time. He gave a beautiful eulogy about how my mother had always treated him like a second son. How she used to make him her famous lasagna whenever he came over. How she had one of the kindest hearts he'd ever known. People cried. I cried. And when it was over, Derek drove me home because Jennifer said she had a headache and needed to leave early. The next few weeks were a blur. I was supposed to go back to work, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I'd wake up every morning and just stare at the ceiling, feeling like there was a weight on my chest that I couldn't move. Jennifer barely spoke to me. She'd sleep on the opposite side of the bed, leave for work before I woke up, and come home late smelling like wine and expensive perfume. I thought she was just giving me space. I thought she was dealing with her own grief in her own way. I didn't realize she was already planning her exit. On December 28th, 2019, I went back to my mother's apartment to finish clearing out her things. I'd been putting it off because it felt too final, but the lease was almost up and the landlord needed the place emptied. I spent most of the day packing up her clothes, her books, her photos. I found a box in the back of her closet with old letters, newspaper clippings, and a small brass key with a number stamped on it. I didn't know what it was for, so I put it in my pocket and figured I'd deal with it later. I finished around 4 in the afternoon, earlier than I expected, and I decided to go home and surprise Jennifer. Maybe cook her dinner, maybe try to reconnect, maybe start rebuilding what felt like it was falling apart. I pulled into the driveway at 4:45. Her car was there. Derek's truck was parked on the street. I thought maybe he'd stop by to check on her, which was nice of him. I walked into the house and it was quiet. Too quiet. I called out Jennifer's name. No answer. I walked through the living room, the kitchen, and then I heard it. Laughter. Her laughter. Coming from upstairs. I climbed the stairs slowly, my heart pounding in a way that didn't make sense yet, and when I got to the top, I saw that our bedroom door was halfway open. I stood there for a moment, frozen, and then I looked inside. Jennifer was in our bed. Derek was next to her. They weren't just lying there. They were tangled up in each other, kissing, laughing, touching in ways that made it very clear this wasn't the first time. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, watching the two people I trusted most in the world betray me in the bed I'd been sleeping in for 8 years. And then Derek said something that I will never, ever forget. He said, "You know, I almost feel bad for him. He's such a mess right now. But honestly, he was never around anyway. You deserve someone who actually pays attention to you." And Jennifer laughed. She actually laughed. She said, "I know. I should have done this years ago. I didn't confront them. I didn't scream or cry or throw things. I just turned around, walked back down the stairs, got in my car, and drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just drove until I ran out of gas on the side of the highway about 30 miles outside of Hartford. I sat there in the dark staring at the dashboard, and I realized that I had nothing left. No mother, no wife, no best friend. No home, nothing. I checked into a motel that night, the kind of place where you pay in cash and don't ask questions. The room smelled like mildew and cigarettes, the sheets were rough and stained, and the heater rattled like it was going to explode. I lay down on the bed fully clothed and I stared at the ceiling for hours. My phone kept buzzing. Jennifer, Derek, over and over. I turned it off. I didn't want to hear their excuses. I didn't want to hear them tell me it wasn't what it looked like or that they were sorry. I knew exactly what it was. And I knew they weren't sorry. They were just sorry they got caught. The next morning, I turned my phone back on. 43 missed calls, 68 text messages, and one voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. It was a woman's voice, professional and calm. She said, "And this is Evelyn Whitmore from Whitmore and Associates in Manhattan. I'm calling regarding the estate of Catherine Eleanor Ashford. It's urgent that we speak as soon as possible. Please return this call at your earliest convenience." I stared at the phone. Catherine Eleanor Ashford. That was my mother's maiden name, the one she never used. The one I only knew because I'd seen it on her birth certificate once when I was helping her apply for a new driver's license. I didn't know why a lawyer in Manhattan would be calling about her estate. As far as I knew, she didn't have an estate. She had a beat-up Honda Civic, a savings account with maybe $3,000 in it, and a storage unit I still hadn't been to. But I didn't have anything else to do, so I called back. Evelyn Whitmore answered on the second ring. She was polite, a professional and direct. She told me that she represented the estate of my late uncle, Thomas Edward Ashford, and that there were matters regarding his will that required my immediate attention. I told her I didn't have an uncle. She told me I did. She told me my mother had a brother that he'd passed away 6 months ago and that I was named as the sole beneficiary of his estate. She asked if I could come to New York to meet with her in person. I told her I didn't have money for a train ticket. She said the firm would cover all my travel expenses and arrange a car to pick me up. 2 days later, I was sitting in the back of a black town car heading toward Manhattan. I was wearing the same clothes I'd been wearing for 3 days. I hadn't showered, I hadn't shaved, I didn't care. I just wanted to get this over with, so I could go back to my motel room and figure out what the hell I was going to do with the rest of my life. The law offices of Whitmore and Associates were located on the 52nd floor of a building in Midtown. The lobby had marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a receptionist who looked like she belonged in a fashion magazine. She smiled at me like I wasn't a disaster, offered me coffee, and told me Ms. Whitmore would be with me shortly. I sat down in a leather chair that probably cost more than my car and waited. 10 minutes later, a woman in her early 60s walked out. She had silver hair, sharp blue eyes, and a suit that looked like it cost more than my monthly mortgage. She shook my hand, introduced herself as Evelyn, and led me into a conference room with a view of Central Park. She offered me coffee again. I accepted. And then she opened a folder and changed my life. She started by telling me about the Ashford family, my mother's family. She said they'd been one of the wealthiest families in New England for over 100 years. They owned Ashford Industrial Holdings, a conglomerate that dealt in steel manufacturing, commercial real estate, and industrial machinery. At its peak in the 1980s, the company was worth over $2 billion. My grandfather, Edward Ashford, ran the company with an iron fist. He was old money, old values, and he had very specific ideas about who his children should marry and how they should live. My mother, Catherine, was his only daughter. She grew up in a 20-room mansion in Greenwich, went to private schools, and was expected to marry someone from their social circle. Instead, she fell in love with my father, a construction worker from Hartford with no college degree and no money. Her father gave her an ultimatum: leave him or leave the family. She chose my father, and Edward Ashford kept his word. He disowned her, cut her off completely. She walked away from the mansion, the money, the life she'd known, and she never looked back. Evelyn paused, looked at me, and said, "Your mother had one brother, Thomas. He was 10 years older than her, and when your grandfather died in 1985, Thomas inherited everything: the company, the properties, the fortune. Your mother got nothing, not because she wasn't in the will, but because your grandfather had rewritten it the day after she married your father." Evelyn slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of my grandfather's will, dated July 1979, and it explicitly stated that Catherine Eleanor Ashford was to receive nothing from the estate due to her willful disregard for family values and disgraceful marriage. I stared at the words. Disgraceful marriage, my parents, the two kindest, most loving people I'd ever known. Disgraceful, Evelyn continued. She told me that Thomas had run the company for nearly 40 years. He never married, never had children. He was ruthless in business, but reclusive in his personal life. And when he died of a heart attack in May of 2019, just 6 months before my mother passed, he left a will that shocked everyone. He left everything to his only living blood relative, me. Evelyn opened another folder and pulled out a document. She said, "Your uncle's estate has been appraised at approximately $412 million. That includes the sale of Ashford Industrial Holdings, which was sold to a private equity firm 3 years ago, as well as real estate holdings, investments, and liquid assets. As of today, you are the sole heir." I stared at her. I didn't blink. I didn't move. I just stared. She continued talking, something about taxes and probate and timelines, but I couldn't hear her. All I could hear was the number, $412 million. I thought I was going to pass out. When I finally found my voice, I asked her why. Why would a man I'd never met, a man who stood by while his sister was disowned, leave me anything? Evelyn's expression softened. She said, "I asked myself the same question. But then I read the letter he left for you." She reached into the folder and pulled out an envelope. My name was written on the front in neat, slanted handwriting. She handed it to me. I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. The letter said, "Michael, you don't know me, and I didn't know you, but I knew your mother, and I failed her." When she left, I said nothing. I let our father erase her like she never existed, and I told myself it was because I had no choice. But I did have a choice. I chose money over family. I chose pride over love, and I have regretted it every single day of my life. I tried to reach out to her over the years, but she never responded. I don't blame her. I don't deserve her forgiveness. But I hope that by leaving you this, I can give you the life she deserved to have. The life she sacrificed so you could become a good man. Use this wisely, honor her, and live the life she would have been proud of. Thomas. I read the letter 3 times. I folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and looked at Evelyn. I asked her what happens next. She told me there was a 6-month probate process, but that the estate was uncontested and straightforward. She said I'd have access to a portion of the funds within 30 days and full access within 6 months. She asked if I had any questions. I had 1,000 questions, but the only one I could manage to ask was, "Does anyone else know about this?" She said no. The only people who knew were the lawyers, the executors, and now me. I thanked her. I stood up. I shook her hand. And I walked out of that office in a daze. I took the train back to Hartford. I went back to my motel. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I thought about everything that had happened in the last 6 weeks. I'd lost my mother. I'd lost my wife. I'd lost my best friend. And I'd gained a fortune I didn't know existed. I could have called Jennifer. I could have called Derek. I could have told them everything and watched them scramble to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, to pretend they hadn't spent the last month laughing at me while I fell apart. But I didn't, because I realized something sitting in that motel room. They didn't deserve to know. Not yet. And when they finally found out, it wasn't going to be because I told them. It was going to be because they realized too late exactly what they'd thrown away. Jennifer's lawyer contacted me 2 weeks later. She was filing for divorce. She wanted the house. She wanted the car. She wanted half of my pension and half of my savings. The lawyer, a man named Richard with a condescending voice in an expensive suit, told me that Jennifer was willing to be reasonable if I didn't fight her on this. He said she was entitled to half of everything we'd accumulated during the marriage, and that if I contested it, things would get ugly. I listened to him talk for about 5 minutes, and then I said, "Fine. Give her whatever she wants." He paused. He asked if I was sure. I said yes. I signed every paper they put in front of me. I gave her the house. I gave her the car. I gave her half of the savings account, which was about $11,000. I gave her everything she asked for without a single argument. Richard seemed confused, but he didn't push. The divorce was finalized in March of 2020. I didn't attend the hearing. I signed the papers remotely and had them sent back. And just like that, Jennifer got everything she wanted. What she didn't know was that the inheritance hadn't been finalized yet. Legally, it didn't exist during our marriage. It came through 4 weeks after the divorce was signed, which meant she had no claim to any of it. Not a single dollar. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell Derek. I didn't tell anyone. I moved to New York. I rented a penthouse apartment in Tribeca with views of the Hudson River. I bought new clothes. I got a haircut. I started working out. I hired a financial advisor, a lawyer, and a team of people whose only job was to help me figure out what to do with more money than I ever imagined having. And I started giving it away. My mother had spent her entire life working for people who barely noticed her. She'd cleaned hotel rooms, served coffee to truckers, and sacrificed everything so I could have a chance at something better. So I decided to honor her the only way I knew how. I donated $50 million to pancreatic cancer research. I set up a scholarship fund in her name for first-generation college students. I funded meal programs at the diner where she used to work. I bought the apartment building she lived in and cut the rent in half for every tenant. I gave money to causes she cared about, to people who reminded me of her, to communities that needed it, and I did it all anonymously. I didn't want recognition. I didn't want praise. I just wanted to make sure that her life, her sacrifices, her kindness meant something. But I also wanted Jennifer and Derek to know what they lost. So I waited. I watched from a distance. I saw the social media posts. Jennifer and Derek at brunch, Jennifer and Derek at a concert, Jennifer and Derek moving in together. Their friends commented things like, "So happy for you two," and "You guys are perfect together." Nobody mentioned me. It was like I never existed. And then in June of 2021, I got the invitation. Jennifer and Derek were getting married. The wedding was at a vineyard in upstate Connecticut. Rustic chic, string lights and mason jars. 150 guests. Open bar. The works. I wasn't invited, obviously, but I sent a gift. I had it delivered during the reception. A large envelope hand-delivered by a courier in a black suit. Inside was a photo of me at a charity gala. I was shaking hands with the governor, wearing a tuxedo that cost more than Derek's truck, and a letter. I kept it short. I wrote, "Dear Jennifer and Derek, congratulations on your marriage. I'm sorry I couldn't attend, but I've been quite busy. I wanted to thank you both. Jennifer, you taught me that love without loyalty is worthless. Derek, you taught me that trust must be earned, not assumed. When my mother died, I lost everything that mattered. You both made sure I knew how alone I truly was. What you didn't know was that my mother left me something far more valuable than your pity. The truth about who I am. I'm now the sole heir to the Ashford fortune. $400 million to be exact. I signed the divorce papers because I wanted you to have the house, Jennifer. It's worth about $340,000. I hope it brings you joy. Meanwhile, I'll be donating most of my inheritance to causes my mother believed in. The rest I'll use to build the life I deserve. I won't see you again, but I'll think of you every time I write a check you couldn't dream of affording. Live well, Michael." I heard later that Jennifer went pale when she read it, that Derek dropped his champagne glass, that the reception ended early because Jennifer locked herself in the bathroom and refused to come out. The story leaked within a week. Someone at the wedding posted about it online, and it spread like wildfire. Suddenly, Jennifer and Derek were the punchline of every betrayal meme on the internet. People they'd never met were commenting on their photos, calling them gold diggers, homewreckers, idiots. Jennifer tried to contest the divorce. She hired a new lawyer. He claimed I'd hidden assets, demanded a portion of the inheritance. But the law was clear. The money came after the divorce was final. She had no claim. The case was dismissed. Derek lost his job 3 months later. Turns out his boss was a major donor to one of the foundations I'd set up. I didn't ask for him to be fired. I didn't have to. Sometimes karma doesn't need help. They sold the house a year later, moved to Arizona. I heard they're still together, but barely. Turns out a relationship built on betrayal doesn't have a strong foundation. Who knew? As for me, I'm doing fine. Better than fine. I live in a city I love, doing work that matters, surrounded by people who value integrity. I think about my mother every day. I keep her letter framed in my office, the one she left in the storage unit, On the one I finally opened 6 months after she died, in it, she told me that if I lost people after she was gone, it meant they'd shown me who they really were. She told me not to mourn them. She told me to use the gift wisely, to honor her, and to never forget that true wealth is measured in character, not currency. I'm trying, Mom. I really am. And I hope wherever you are, you're proud of the man I'm becoming. Not because of the money, but because I'm finally learning what you tried to teach me all along. That the people who love you don't leave when things get hard, and the ones who do were never worth keeping in the first place. So here's my question for you. If you inherited $400 million the day after your divorce, would you tell your ex? Would you have done what I did, or would you have let them know right away? Washa, drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know. And if you made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but I needed to get it out. If you want to hear more stories like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because trust me, the next one is even more unbelievable. Until then, take care of yourselves. And remember, the people who truly matter will show up when it counts. Everyone else is just passing through.